You wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. What you saw in your dream was so realistic that your heart is pounding as if it might leap right out of your chest. In the dream, you sold your soul to the devil. And to celebrate the deal, the devil picks up a violin and plays a melody so enchanting, yet so complex, it pushes the limits of human understanding. No, this isn't the plot of a Netflix horror series. It's a real memory recorded in the diary of Giuseppe Tartini, an Italian composer who lived in the 18th century. As soon as Tartini woke up, he transcribed the melody the devil had played in this dream, and the result was the Devil's Trill Sonata, one of the most challenging works in the history of music. Maybe right now, as you are reading this, you are thinking, wait, the devil and the violin? What's the connection? You're right, when we go to a classical music concert today, dark forces don't come to mind. But if you delve a bit into the dusty pages of art history or old European legends, you'll see that this duo has actually been inseparable for centuries. If you examine scenes of hell in some Renaissance paintings, you might notice a violin burning in the flames in the corner. In old German and French folk tales, the devil disguises himself and challenges villagers to a violin playing contest. In old engravings, demons are depicted holding a bow, that is violin bow. When talented musicians performed wonders on stage, people would whisper in the church aisles, "The devil tuned his violin?" In other words, Tartini didn't just see that nightmare out of the blue. This dream was the result of a social perception that had been woven thread by thread over centuries by the media of the time, church rhetoric and authority. So, have you ever wondered, why doesn't the devil play the piano? Why the violin instead of the flute or the guitar? Why have the violin virtuosos and evil been mentioned in the same breath for centuries? Today we are diving into the darkest, most gossip-filled and most absurd pages of music history. Welcome to the Devil's Instruments and the medieval sociology of if you're having fun, you're definitely bound for hell. First, let's take a look at the nature of the violin. The violin is the instrument that most closely resembles the human voice. It can cry, scream, and moan, especially during the Middle Ages and afterward when the church exercised free control over music. Music was intended solely to glorify God. Plain, simple, unprovocative choral music. But is a violin like that? No, it's a very passionate instrument. And what's more, it can make people cry as well as make them dance. In medieval sociology, losing control of one's body and losing oneself while dancing was viewed as a diabolical act. The church fathers reasoned, if an instrument makes people jump until their feet leave the ground and leaves them drenched in sweat, the devil must surely be pulling those strings. There's also a very famous German saying, "The devil's violin is always in tune." In other words, it will always ready to seduce you. This PR campaign linking the violin to the devil reached its peak in the 19th century with Niccolò Paganini. Paganini played the violin so masterfully that no one believed he was human. His long, slender fingers, his pale complexion, his gothic style clad in black. Even if 3 strings on his violin snapped on stage, he could finish the concert on a single string. Rumors ran rampant among the public. His mother sold his soul to the devil. The strings of his violin were made from the intestines of his murdered mistress. In fact, he played so fast that during a concert in Vienna, one audience member swore he saw a horned devil standing behind Paganini, helping him. The tragicomic part of the story is that when Paganini died, the church refused to bury him in a Christian cemetery for a full 36 years because of rumors that he had made a pact with the devil. Just imagine, you can't even find a burial plot simply because you are too good at your job. So was the violin the devil's only favorite? Not at all. The demonization of musical instruments dates back to ancient times. Let's take a look at the pagan era and how the church hacked this culture. In ancient mythology, there is Pan, the god of nature, the forest, and sexuality. He is depicted as a figure with good legs, horns, and a pan flute in his hands. Early Christianity did something very clever to eradicate pagan beliefs. They portrayed the pagans God as the devil of their own religion. Take note. The classic red-horned, good-legged devil we know is the exact image of the Greek god Pan. Consequently, the flute played by Pan was long considered the sound of lust and sin. Since wind instruments are played with breath, that is with the spirit, it was believed that evil spirits could enter them. Another example is the drum and percussion instruments. In shamanic rituals across Africa and Europe, drums were always used to induce a trance. For the church, rhythm meant the rhythm of the body, it meant ritual, it meant magic. There is even something called the devil's interval in music. Have you heard of it? Legend has it that this dissonant interval was officially banned by the medieval church because it supposedly opened the gates of hell. Well, at least that's the internet wants you to believe. Let me bust that myth for you. There was actually no official ban or papal decree. Medieval choir masters and monks just told their students to avoid it because it was incredibly hard to sing and sounded awkwardly tense and unresolved. But you have to admit the forbidden devil chord made sounds so incredibly cool that bands like Black Sabbath and Metallica still make the bones of those medieval priests ache by using this interval liberally in their songs. This sociology of fear, of course, was reflected in art as well, in particular following the plague epidemic. The art of the dance macabre or dance of death emerged in Europe. In these paintings, cheerful skeletons play the violin, lute or flute. The message is this: that and the devil take hold of you by making you dance and entertaining you. But if you want to see greatest painting of musical torture, let me introduce you to Hieronymus Bosch, the father of absurd art in the Middle Ages. Look at the hell section of Bosch's painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights. Here, demons the torture sinners with musical instruments. One man is crucified on the strings of a harp, another is trapped inside huge hurdy-gurdy. A flute has been thrust into another man's buttocks. Bosch is essentially saying, you had so much fun with music in this world, now you'll burn with those very notes. Musical instruments have been transformed from objects of pleasure into instruments of torture. But wait, if the church hated the ancestors of the violin so much, was it the only instrument on their blacklist? Absolutely not. The devil apparently had a full band. Take the bagpipes, for example. Today when we hear bagpipes, we think of noble Scottish warriors in kilts. But in the Middle Ages, the bagpipe was the ultimate symbol of peasant debauchery, gluttony, and lust. Because it was so loud and accompanied by tavern dances, the church despised it. And then there was the hurdy-gurdy. Imagine a weird medieval mashup for a violin and a hand-cranked music box. Believe it or not, it actually started as a respected instrument, used in church choirs. But as it got smaller, it spilled out into the streets. Soon, it became the soundtrack of beggars, tavern brawls, unhinged street festivals. Naturally, the church quickly kicked it out of the holy halls and branded it as a dirty work object. You see the pattern here? The church didn't necessarily hate the strings, the wood, or the sound itself. They hated what these instruments represented. Ordinary people getting together, letting go of their worries, dancing, and basically having a little too much fun without feeling guilty about it. To sum it up, the violin, the flute, or a black cat had nothing to do with the devil. The real issue was that authority feared emotions it couldn't control. The violin brought out the passion within people, it made them dance, cry, and rejoice. In a system dominated by order and fear, anything like that liberated the body was, of course, bound to be branded diabolical. Paganini's legendary talent was not a curse, but the result of practicing 15 hours a day. But when people see something so perfect that it seems unattainable through hard work, they attribute it to supernatural powers. Don't we say, he's got the devil's touch, or it's the devil's work? To someone who does something exceptionally well display cunning intelligence? So, do yourself a favor, don't be afraid to play violence in your life, turn up the music, and dance. Let the medieval priests keep frowning in their paintings. If you liked the video, don't forget to break the devil's leg by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Let's meet in the comments. What do you think could be the devil's instrument or object in the modern world? Take care of yourself, your inner demons, and the music. Bye for now.